Get up. You need to come with us. Right now." The words cut through first class like a dropped glass. A woman 2 rows back stopped mid-sip, her champagne flute frozen an inch from her lips. Somewhere near the galley, the low hum of the boarding music seemed to fade into nothing. Every head turned. Marcus Reyes did not turn with them. He was 54 years old, sitting in seat 1C, wearing a gray wool jacket with no tie, the kind of plain, unremarkable clothing that never announced anything about the man wearing it. His boarding pass sat folded on the tray table beside a paperback he hadn't opened yet. He looked up slowly at the 2 uniformed figures standing over him, and there was no panic on his face. No anger either, just a long, quiet stillness, the kind that made people nervous because they couldn't read it. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The woman standing closest to him wore a navy blazer with gold piping and a laminated badge that read, "Patricia Hargrove, In-Flight Surface Manager." She didn't answer right away. Beside her stood a younger gate security officer, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt like he was waiting for permission to use it. "We've had a concern raised," Hargrove said. "We need you to step off the aircraft." "What kind of concern?" "That's not something I can discuss here." Marcus looked around the cabin. A man near the window had lowered his phone into his lap, not recording, just holding it because it gave his hands something to do. A woman in a cream sweater, 2 rows over, had suddenly become very interested in her own coffee cup. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at him directly. That was the part that stayed with him longest later, when he replayed the morning in his head. Not the words, the silence around the words. He closed his laptop, slowly, carefully, as if he had all the time in the world, though something inside him had already gone tight and cold. Because Marcus Reyes had learned a long time ago that there are moments when arguing only feeds the wrong story, and there are moments when silence tells the truth louder than shouting ever could. He stood. "Lead the way," he said. As he stepped into the aisle, he heard it, a voice, low, almost proud of itself. I knew something was off about him. He didn't need to look to know where it came from. He looked anyway. Row 2C, the woman in the cream sweater, early 50s, polished nails, a Cartier bracelet catching the cabin light. She dropped her eyes the moment his met hers. Too late. He had already seen it, the certainty in her face, the total absence of doubt. He walked forward, past the flight attendant, who forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, past rows that suddenly felt narrower than they had 10 minutes ago. The cabin door was open, cold air rushing up from the jet bridge, and the moment he crossed that threshold, something in him shifted too. He was no longer a passenger. He was a situation. 3 hours earlier, Marcus had been standing in the kitchen of a 2-bedroom rental unit in a quiet part of Denver, the kind of apartment nobody would guess belonged to a man who was 2 signatures away from closing the largest infrastructure investment of his career. He liked plain things. He always had. A gray Honda in the parking garage instead of anything that turned heads. A watch on his left wrist that had belonged to his father, the crystal scratched, the leather band cracked at the seam, worth maybe $40 if you sold it, worth everything if you understood what it meant. His father had worn that watch for 31 years, fixing airplane engines on the tarmac at a regional airport in Ohio, coming home every night, smelling like jet fuel and dinner going cold on the stove. His father had never flown first class in his life. Had never flown at all, actually, until the year before he died, when Marcus bought him a ticket to Arizona and watched the old man stare out the window the entire flight like a boy seeing snow for the first time. That was the thing nobody in seat 2C would ever understand. Marcus Reyes hadn't built Bridgeline Capital Partners to prove anything to people like her. He'd built it because his father used to say, quietly, almost like an apology, that some men get to sit up front and some men just fix the engines. And Marcus had spent 26 years trying to make that sentence stop being true for anyone else's son. Today, he was flying to Charlotte, North Carolina, to close a $6.4 billion investment in Continental Skyline Airlines, a deal that would modernize their fleet, restructure their ground operations, and, buried in Clause 14 of a 200-page agreement nobody in that boardroom had noticed him insist on, fund a permanent oversight board for how the airline treated its passengers and its people. Nobody on Flight 118 knew any of that. They just saw a quiet man in a plain jacket sitting in Seat 1C, and Patricia Hargrove had already decided, somewhere between boarding and beverage service, that he didn't belong there. Patricia Hargrove had been flying for 22 years. She had trained under 3 different airline names as Continental Skyline absorbed smaller carriers, survived 2 rounds of layoffs, and clawed her way into the in-flight service manager role through nothing but seniority and an iron belief that she alone understood what standards meant. She was, by every official account, excellent at her job. She remembered names. She handled turbulent passengers with a calm, practiced voice. She had once talked a man out of a full panic attack over the Rockies, using nothing but breathing exercises and a cup of ginger ale. She was also, quietly, consistently, the kind of employee who filed more identity verification concerns against Black and Latino passengers in first class than any other crew member in the airline's Western division. A pattern nobody had ever bothered to pull up, because nobody had ever been told to look. 9 minutes into boarding, Diane Ashworth, the woman in Seat 2C, had leaned toward Hargrove during the safety demonstration and murmured 5 words that would end up costing more people their jobs, their reputations, and in one case, their freedom, than either woman could possibly have imagined. "That man doesn't look right." Hargrove hadn't asked what she meant. She hadn't needed to. She simply nodded, the way you nod at something you already believed before anyone said it out loud, and radioed the gate. That was the first tier, quiet, deniable. The kind of thing that, if questioned later, could be explained away as an abundance of caution. Nobody raises their voice at this stage. Nobody has to. Outside on the jet bridge, the air was different, louder somehow, less controlled. A luggage cart rattled somewhere down the corridor. The gate security officer, his name tag read L. Ferris, pulled a small notepad from his pocket. Full name? Marcus Reyes. Purpose of travel? Business. What kind of business? Marcus shifted his weight, watching Ferris now, really watching him, the way you watch someone deciding whether to keep going down a road they already suspect is wrong. "A meeting," Marcus said. "With who?" A pause. "Not long, long enough." "With your airline's executive board," Marcus said. "Tomorrow morning." Ferris blinked. Hargrove, standing just behind him, folded her arms. "And your role in that meeting?" Marcus held her eyes for a moment longer than was comfortable. "I'm the one funding it." The jet bridge went quiet in a different way than the cabin had. Not respectful. Not yet. Just uncertain. The kind of silence that comes right before someone realizes the ground under them isn't as solid as they thought. "Do you have anything that confirms that?" Hargrove asked, and there was still an edge in her voice, still that stubborn refusal to be the one who was wrong. Marcus reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and turned the screen toward her. An email thread, names, titles, a dollar figure with 9 digits before the decimal point. Investment Committee, final terms, 6,400,000,000, signature pending. Ferris leaned in and read faster than he meant to. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Somewhere behind them, a luggage cart rolled past, and the ordinary noise of an airport terminal kept moving forward, indifferent to the fact that something in this small corner of it had just cracked open. Hargrove's jaw tightened. "Well," she said finally, "it looks like everything checks out." "Checks out," Marcus repeated. He didn't smile. He didn't push. He just stood there, waiting. "You're free to return to your seat, sir," Ferris said. "Sir." The word had changed shape in the space of 90 seconds. It hadn't earned that shift through respect. It had earned it through fear. If you think that's the end of it, you're wrong. Because Patricia Hargrove was not a woman who apologized easily. And the next 24 hours were going to prove exactly how far she was willing to go to avoid admitting she'd been wrong in front of a plane full of witnesses. Marcus walked back down the jet bridge, no rush in his step, no hesitation, just the same measured pace he'd used walking out. At the cabin door, the young flight attendant, her name tag read A. Lively, stepped aside too quickly. "Welcome back," she said, her voice careful, thin. He didn't answer. He walked in. Heads lifted again, not as openly this time, but they lifted. A man in the aisle seat suddenly found something fascinating in the seat back pocket in front of him. A woman near the window pressed her lips together and stared straight ahead. Row 2C. Diane Ashworth did not look up. Her hand gripped her coffee cup so tightly the lid bent under her fingers, a thin line of liquid trembling at the seam. Marcus paused beside his seat for half a second, not to embarrass her, not to confront her, just to exist there fully in the space she had tried to say he didn't belong in. Then he sat down, opened his laptop. Same movements as before boarding. Nothing about them was the same. The cabin door seals with a dull, final click. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and unaware, like nothing at all had happened 30 feet from the cockpit. "We'll be pushing back shortly, folks. Sit back and relax." Marcus did not sit back. He opened a blank document and began typing while the memory was still sharp. Time of boarding. Names remembered. Words spoken. Who looked away and who didn't. He had learned this from 26 years of closing deals with men who thought they could talk their way out of a paper trail. Memory faded. Documents didn't. Then he opened his email and typed one name from memory. Sandra Wells, General Counsel, Continental Skyline Airlines. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he began. Removed from aircraft prior to departure. No explanation provided. Reinstated only after verification of identity and business relationship. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern the airline has failed to see. He hit send before the wheels had even started to move. The plane began to roll. Slow, then steady, the runway sliding by in long gray lines outside the window. Marcus picked up the glass of water the same young attendant had brought him. No ice. Her hand lingering a half-second too long as she set it down. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. For earlier he looked at her. Really looked. There was something new there. Not fear exactly. Awareness. He nodded once, not forgiving, not condemning, just acknowledging that she had said it. She stepped away toward the galley, her shoulders tight. Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit leaned toward him. Late 60s, a wedding ring worn smooth from decades of use, hands marked by years of honest labor. "Sir," he said, "I owe you an apology. I sat here and watched. I knew it felt wrong. I didn't say a word." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "I do." The man's voice wavered slightly. "I should have spoken up." "Yes," Marcus said. "You should have." The man nodded, absorbing it without flinching. "I will next time." Marcus believed him. Not because the promise was dramatic, but because it cost the man something to say it out loud, in front of strangers, without being asked twice. The runway stretched wide and empty in front of them. Marcus reached for his phone one more time and scrolled to a contact he hadn't planned on using until the following morning. Robert Calloway, Chief Executive Officer, Continental Skyline Airlines. His thumb pressed the call button before he'd fully decided to. 2 rings, then a voice, confident, unaware Marcus. "Looking forward to tomorrow." "We need to talk," Marcus said, and this time there was no pause on his end at all. Robert Calloway did not speak for several seconds after Marcus finished. When he did, his voice had lost its polish entirely. "Removed? For what reason?" "That's the question I'm hoping your airline can answer," Marcus said. "They said they needed to verify my identity. They pulled me out of my seat in front of an entire cabin. Only after I showed them my phone did they let me back on. Were you touched? Detained? Anything physical? No. Calloway exhaled slowly. That almost makes it worse. It does, Marcus said, because people will call it a misunderstanding, and they'll expect me to move on. The plane lifted off the runway. Outside the window, Denver fell away beneath the wing, the grid of streets shrinking into geometry. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that belonged to a man doing math in his head. The kind of math that involved lawsuits, headlines, and a $6.4 billion deal that could still fall apart before the ink dried. I want a full report the moment you land, Calloway finally said. Every name, every word. You'll have it, Marcus. Yes. I'm sorry. This time it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like a man realizing, in real time, the size of the hole his company had just dug for itself. I know, Marcus said, and ended the call. By the time the plane touched down in Charlotte, the woman in 2C had already tried, twice, to catch the eye of a flight attendant and failed both times. When Amber Lively finally passed her row again, Diane leaned forward. "Excuse me," Diane said. "I think I may have caused all of this." The attendant stopped walking. "I told someone he didn't seem like he belonged." Diane's voice had lost every bit of its earlier certainty. "I wasn't trying to get anyone thrown off a plane." "I understand," Amber said carefully. "No," Diane whispered, staring at the tray table in front of her. "I don't think you do. My father taught me to judge people by how they treat others. Somewhere along the way, I stopped doing that." Amber didn't know what to say. Neither did anyone sitting close enough to hear. She walked back toward the galley, where a second, older attendant caught the look on her face. "You okay?" "Not really," Amber said. "We followed a complaint. We never once asked whether the complaint made any sense. So we trusted the assumption." Yes. Neither woman said anything else. The realization didn't need decoration. It sat in the small galley between them like something heavy that had just been set down and couldn't be picked back up the same way again. Here's the part almost nobody in that cabin saw coming. The woman who whispered 5 careless words was about to spend the next 3 days watching her name get pulled apart in a boardroom she never expected to be in. And the manager who never doubted herself for a second was about to learn that a 22-year career built on quiet certainty can end in about the same amount of time it takes to read one spreadsheet. The next morning, at 9 sharp, Marcus walked into Continental Skyline's headquarters on South Tryon Street in downtown Charlotte. A glass tower with the Airline's Silver Falcon logo mounted 40 feet above the entrance. Robert Calloway met him in the lobby personally, no assistant trailing behind, no press waiting outside. Just the CEO alone, looking like a man who hadn't slept. "I pulled the internal complaint logs last night," Calloway said, as they walked toward the elevator. "I need you to see something before we go upstairs." In a small conference room on the 11th floor, Sandra Wells, the general counsel, had already laid out a folder 3 inches thick on the table. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Patricia Hargrove has filed 19 identity verification concerns in the last 4 years, Sandra said. 14 of them involved Black or Latino passengers, seated in first class. 12 of the 14 were resolved with an apology and a travel voucher. Nobody ever pulled the pattern because nobody was ever asked to look for one." Calloway sat down slowly, like the weight of the number had physically pushed him into the chair. 14 out of 19. "There's more," Sandra said. 2 of those passengers filed formal complaints with the Department of Transportation. Both complaints were closed internally as unsubstantiated by Hargrove's own direct supervisor, who happens to be her husband's cousin. The room went still in the way a room does when everyone in it understands, at the exact same moment, that they are no longer looking at one bad morning. They are looking at a system that had been quietly protecting itself for years. "What do you want to do?" Calloway asked, looking at Marcus. Marcus opened the folder, scanning the names, the dates, the dollar amounts of the travel vouchers that had been used to make 14 separate incidents disappear without ever changing anything about how they happened. I'm not interested in one manager losing her badge and everyone calling it justice, Marcus said. I want every one of those 14 passengers found. I want them told what actually happened to their complaints, and I want an independent audit of every crew member's file across the entire airline, going back 5 years. Sandra Wells nodded slowly. That's going to cost you time on the closing. Then it costs me time, Marcus said. The audit took 11 days. Marcus flew back to Denver twice during that stretch, and both times reporters were already camped outside his office, tipped off by someone inside Continental Skyline who couldn't stay quiet about what the investigators were finding. He gave no interviews. He let the paper trail speak for itself. What it said was worse than anyone in that 11th floor conference room had expected. Patricia Hargrove had not acted alone, and she had not acted rarely. The audit uncovered a spreadsheet on a shared drive, informally passed between 3 senior crew members over the years, that flagged passengers by seat number with a single column labeled simply check. Nobody had ever written down what check meant. Nobody had needed to. Every single flagged passenger across 4 years shared one thing in common, and it wasn't anything printed on their boarding pass. There was also an email sent 18 months earlier in which Hargrove had written to her supervisor after one of the DOT complaints. I stand by my judgment. Some people simply don't carry themselves the way that cabin expects. Her supervisor had replied with a single line. Understood. Keep doing what you're doing. That email became the centerpiece of everything that followed. Hargrove was called into a formal review 2 weeks after the flight. She sat across from Sandra Wells, a labor attorney, and a human resources director, the folder from the audit, sitting closed on the table between them. She did not apologize, not once in 90 minutes. I was doing my job, she said, arms crossed. If people don't like being asked a few questions, that's not discrimination. That's procedure. There is no procedure that instructs crew to remove a passenger from an aircraft based on a comment about how he looks, Sandra said, sliding the audit summary across the table. There's this instead. Hargrove glanced at the 14 names listed on the page and did not flinch. I don't recognize a pattern in doing my job carefully. You will, Sandra said quietly, by the time this is finished. She was terminated that afternoon. Not suspended, not offered a quiet resignation with a severance package and a signature on a non-disclosure agreement. Terminated, with cause, the decision documented in writing and copied to every regulatory body that had jurisdiction to ask why it had taken 4 years and a $6 billion investor to catch what should have been obvious the first time. Her supervisor, the one who had told her to keep doing what she was doing, was terminated the same week. The Department of Transportation reopened both closed complaints and launched a formal civil rights investigation into the airline's complaint handling process, an investigation that would eventually result in a $2.1 million settlement and a 5-year federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of every identity verification. Incident going forward. Hargrove filed a wrongful termination lawsuit 3 months later. It fell apart in discovery. When her own emails, her own spreadsheet entries, her own words were read back to a courtroom that had already seen the Flight 118 footage, circulated online more than 11 million times. She lost. She was ordered to cover the airline's legal costs. Her flight attendant certification, once the thing she was proudest of in the entire world, was permanently revoked by the FAA following the DOT findings. No airline in the country would touch her name again. The woman who had spent 22 years deciding who looked like they belonged in first class ended up, 8 months later, working the overnight shift at a rental car counter outside a regional airport in South Carolina, where the largest decision she made in a day was which customer got the compact and which one got the mid-size. Diane Ashworth's story went differently because she chose differently. She wrote a letter, not to a lawyer, not to the press, but to Marcus directly, admitting exactly what she'd said and exactly why she'd said it. She asked for nothing except the chance to make it right. Marcus never met with her personally, but he did forward the letter, unedited, to Sandra Wells with a single instruction: use it in the new bias awareness training with her name attached if she consents to it. Diane consented. Her own words, read aloud in a training room to new flight crews 18 months later, became one of the most quoted lines in the entire program. I judged a man in 3 seconds, and it took me 3 days to understand what that cost him. She never flew Continental Skyline again, without walking up to whichever gate agent was working and saying good morning, Murphy, waiting for them to finish whatever they were doing before she said another word. The investment committee met 9 days after the audit closed. Around a long table on the top floor of Bridgeline Capital's Denver office sat investors, board members, and senior advisors who had trusted Marcus Reyes's judgment for over 2 decades. They also expected him, always, to separate feeling from finance. Eleanor Vance, the committee chair, folded her glasses and set them down. The airline responded faster and more thoroughly than any company I've seen in a situation like this. Termination. Federal disclosure. A 5-year consent decree they didn't fight. She looked directly at Marcus. The question is whether we move forward. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to him. This was never about punishment, Marcus said finally. If I wanted revenge, this meeting would already be over, and there wouldn't be a deal left to discuss. Then what are we deciding? One board member asked. Whether their accountability is real, Marcus said. He set Sandra Wells's full report on the table. I believe it is. But I'm not signing today. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. If you believe they're sincere, why wait? Because trust is built through actions, not promises, Marcus said. Culture doesn't change in 11 days. It changes one decision at a time, made over and over, long after nobody's watching anymore. Eleanor wrote a single line in her notebook and underlined it twice. Trust requires evidence. The committee voted unanimously to keep the deal alive on a 90-day observation period. There were no losers in that room that day. Only responsibility, finally landing where it belonged. 90 days later, Robert Calloway called Marcus personally to deliver the news himself. The Independent Oversight Board just certified every reform, he said. Every single one implemented. They added 6 recommendations we hadn't even thought of. Did you accept them? All of them, Calloway said. There was a pause, longer than the silence usually allowed between 2 men who talked business for a living. I owe you something, Marcus. You don't owe me anything. I do. You reminded me that leadership isn't protecting a company's reputation. It's protecting the people who trust that reputation in the first place. Neither man spoke for a moment. Some silences carry more weight than any sentence that could follow them. The $6.4 billion deal closed the following week. Not because Continental Skyline had become a perfect company. No company ever does. It closed because for 90 straight days, they had chosen accountability over excuses and action over appearances. And the most valuable thing that deal ever produced was never going to show up on a balance sheet. 6 months after Flight 118, Marcus walked back through the same terminal in Denver where it had all started. No cameras followed him this time. No reporters waited by the gate. To everyone around him, he was just another traveler pulling a scuffed leather carry-on across polished floors, the same scratched watch on his wrist that his father used to wear on the tarmac decades earlier. The terminal looked almost unchanged. Same departure boards, same coffee stand near gate C14. But something in the air had shifted in ways most people would never notice unless they were looking for them. A young gate agent greeted every single passenger with the same steady, unhurried smile. An elderly couple struggling with an oversized suitcase had help before they even had to ask. A wheelchair attendant waited patiently beside a nervous teenager, traveling alone, chatting with her gently until her family found the gate. Small things, easy to miss. Marcus noticed every one of them, because real culture is rarely built through a headline. It's built through 100 ordinary decisions, repeated on 100 ordinary mornings, by people who will never see their names in any report. As he approached security, someone called his name, Mr. Reyes. He turned. It was Louis Ferris, the young security officer from that morning 6 months earlier. Older somehow, though it hadn't been long. Not in age, in something else. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," Ferris said. "I remember." Ferris took a slow breath. "I wanted to thank you. You could have asked for my job. You didn't. Instead, you asked the airline to help me get better at mine." He hesitated. "My daughter asked me last week why I started volunteering at the community center on weekends. I told her someone reminded me that wearing a badge doesn't automatically make you right. It just gives you the chance to do right." Neither man spoke for a moment. Then Marcus extended his hand. Ferris shook it, firm, no bitterness left in it at all. Further down the concourse, Amber Lively approached, now wearing a different pin on her uniform. Training lead stitched beneath her name. "I thought that was you," she said, smiling. "You look well." "I am," Marcus said. "I've been leading the new hire orientation," she said, pulling a worn notebook from her bag. She opened it to the first page. One line, underlined twice. "Following procedure will never excuse abandoning humanity. We read it together every Monday." "Then something good came out of a difficult morning," Marcus said. "It did," she said. When boarding began, an elderly veteran a few places ahead of Marcus fumbled through his jacket, searching for his boarding pass, his hands trembling slightly. The gate agent didn't rush him. "Take your time, sir," she said. "No impatience, no suspicion, just respect." The man found his pass and exhaled with relief. "Thank you." "You're very welcome." It lasted only a few seconds. Most people in that line probably forgot it before they'd even reached their seats. Marcus did not. Dignity, he had learned, usually lives inside moments that small. Once the plane leveled off above the clouds, his phone buzzed once. A message from Robert Calloway. The Independent Culture Report had just been released publicly. Customer trust scores were up. Employee confidence was up. Complaints involving unfair treatment had dropped by more than 60% industry-wide, since Continental Skyline published its findings and its penalties for the world to see. At the bottom of the report was a single sentence that Sandra Wells had insisted stay in, word for word, no matter how many executives wanted it softened. Culture changes when people decide that respect is no longer optional. Marcus locked his phone and looked out at the clouds stretching endlessly beneath the wing. He thought about his father's watch on his wrist, about a mechanic who never got to sit up front, about a manager who never once said she was sorry and lost everything because of it, about a woman who did say it and rebuilt something better than what she'd broken. Sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the one holding the most power. It's the one who refuses to let a personal injustice curdle into hatred. The one who turns it, instead, into something that protects the next person who walks down that aisle. That kind of decision doesn't make headlines for long, but it outlasts every single one of them.